All right, so let's dive into this whole media shakeup. Things are changing.
Yeah.
And we're going to explore all that in this deep dive.
Yeah, it really does feel like one of those moments, where you can sense the ground shifting, but
Yeah.
you haven't felt the full impact just yet.
Yeah, exactly. And a great example of that is this whole thing with Comcast spinning off MSNBC.
Yeah.
Separating it from NBC Universal.
Right. And at first glance, you might think, oh, just some corporate restructuring. But it's actually way more significant than that.
It really is, because it points to this larger trend of the traditional media landscape kind of like breaking apart, or at least being challenged in ways we haven't really seen before.
Exactly. Like the old rules don't apply anymore.
Yeah.
And then you have figures like Elon Musk coming in, stirring the pot, as he always does.
Oh, yeah. He couldn't resist, could he?
Yeah.
With those tweets about, maybe buying MSNBC and firing Rachel Maddow just for fun and turning it into like a platform for X's top stories.
Right. And whether he's serious or not, which is always hard to tell with Musk. It highlights this really interesting question about the power dynamics in media these days.
Absolutely. Because suddenly you have these individuals like Musk with their massive online presence and their willingness to kind of disrupt everything, potentially reshaping these traditional networks. Like, what would an MSNBC under Musk even look like?
Right. It's a fascinating thought experiment. And then you have Joe Rogan jumping into the mix.
Oh, yeah, with his offer to take over Maddow's show.
Right. And, tell the same lies. But in her outfit and glasses. It's obviously a joke. But, but it does make you think about what happens when you bring a voice like Rogan's with his huge podcast audience into the world of cable news.
Yeah. I mean, could someone like that actually change the game?
Potentially. I mean, he has this direct line to millions of listeners who trust him, who feel like he's authentic. So it's not just about entertainment anymore. It's about how people are getting their information and who they're choosing to trust.
Exactly. And that brings us back to MSNBC, because this spinoff comes at a really interesting time for them. Their ratings have been declining, especially since Trump's reelection. Maddow, for instance, has lost almost half her viewers.
Right. They're at a crossroads. Do they lean further into their existing audience or try to attract a broader audience? Do they double down on their current approach or try to reinvent themselves?
It's like they're being forced to make a choice.
Exactly. And that choice will have ripple effects, not just for MSNBC, but for the broader media landscape as well.
So we've got this media landscape influx, traditional networks trying to figure out their place, and these figures like Musk and Rogan wielding this unprecedented influence. And at the heart of it all is this question of how we, the audience, are consuming news and who we're choosing to trust.
It's not just about who owns the networks anymore. It's about how information flows and who controls that flow.
All right, so much to unpack here. But before we get too far ahead of ourselves, let's just kind of recap what we've learned so far. We started with this whole Comcast spinoff, which really signals a pretty big shift in how the traditional media landscape is structured.
Right. It's like acknowledging that the old model of these bundled cable packages is fading away. Viewers want more choice and control over what they watch and when they watch it.
Okay, then we had Musk and Rogan injecting themselves into the conversation, even if it was mostly tongue-in-cheek.
But their comments weren't just for laughs. They highlighted this larger trend of personalities gaining more influence than institutions.
Yeah, people are gravitating towards these figures, who they feel a connection with, whether they agree with them or not.
Exactly. It's about authenticity. It's about feeling like you're getting an unfiltered perspective.
And finally, we touched on the challenges facing MSNBC as they try to navigate this new reality.
They're facing some tough decisions
Oh, yeah.
about their identity, their audience, their future.
Okay, so much to think about already, but I'm ready to go deeper. What's the next layer of this deep dive?
Well, let's explore this whole idea of shifting influence. We've talked about Musk and Rogan, but what about the broader landscape of alternative media platforms? What's happening there, and what does it mean for how we consume news?
Okay, lead the way. I'm all ears.
For years, it was like these traditional networks had all the power. They decided what we saw, when we saw it, and how we saw it.
They were the gatekeepers, right?
Exactly. But now those gates are wide open. It's like going from a curated gallery to this massive, sprawling marketplace of information.
Yeah, and it's overwhelming at times. You've got everything out there,
Yeah.
from these hyper niche blogs to global streaming platforms.
And navigating in that marketplace requires a different set of skills. It's not just about passively absorbing what's presented to you. It's about actively seeking out information, evaluating sources, forming your own conclusions.
You almost have to become your own editor.
Exactly. And that's where these alternative platforms come in. They're filling a void, offering a different kind of news experience.
So what does that experience look like? What are people drawn to in these alternative spaces?
Well, take podcasts, for example. They've exploded in popularity. And it's not just for entertainment. People are getting their news, their analysis, in-depth conversations on all sorts of topics through this seemingly informal medium.
It's interesting, right? Because it seems so casual. But people are clearly getting something out of it.
They are. And I think part of the appeal is that it feels more authentic, more connected.
Like you're part of the conversation.
Exactly. You're not just being lectured to. You're hearing people talk through ideas, debating different perspectives.
Yeah, I can see that. It's like sitting in on a discussion with friends.
Yeah.
Except those friends happen to be experts on whatever they're talking about.
Right. And that feeling of connection builds trust. It creates a sense of community.
Which is something that traditional networks have struggled with.
Yeah, they're used to being the authority, the ones dictating the narrative.
But now it's more of a two-way street, or maybe even a multi-lane highway with traffic going in all directions.
Exactly. And that's both exciting and challenging.
Exciting because it opens up so many possibilities.
Yeah.
But challenging because how do you ensure quality control? How do you prevent the spread of misinformation?
Right. Because if everyone's a publisher, how do you know who to trust?
It's a valid concern.
It is. And it makes media literacy more important than ever. We need to be able to critically evaluate sources, consider different perspectives, and recognize bias.
Both in ourselves and in the information we're consuming.
Exactly. It's not about blindly trusting a particular source. It's about developing the skills to navigate this complex information landscape ourselves.
So we have to be more discerning.
We do. And we also have to be aware of the role that these platforms themselves are playing.
Okay, what do you mean by that?
Well, think about how these platforms curate content, how they promote certain voices over others, what algorithms are shaping what we see and hear.
It's like a whole other layer of complexity.
It is, and it's something we need to be aware of if we want to make informed choices about what we're consuming.
So it's not just about individual responsibility.
No, it's also about understanding the systems, the structures that are shaping our information environment.
So this isn't just a media evolution, it's a societal evolution.
Exactly, because how we consume information shapes how we understand the world, how we engage with each other, how we participate in our democracy.
It's all connected.
It is, and it brings us back to this idea of influence, because when the lines between entertainment news and opinion blur, the potential for manipulation increases.
Both intentional and unintentional.
Right. So we have to be vigilant, we have to be critical, we have to be engaged.
And that brings us back to MSNBC. How do they fit into all of this? Can they adapt to these new realities? Or are they destined to become relics of the past?
Well, I think the answer lies in understanding their audience.
Okay, let's talk audience then. Who's tuning into MSNBC and what are they looking for?
Traditionally, they've appealed to a more liberal-leaning viewership. People who are looking for a certain perspective on current events.
But with the rise of these alternative platforms, viewers have so many more options now.
They do. So the question is, how does MSNBC stand out? How do they retain their existing audience and potentially attract new viewers?
That's a tough challenge.
It is. And it's not just a challenge for MSNBC, it's a challenge for all traditional news organizations.
So what's the solution?
Well, I think they need to find ways to adapt, to innovate, to offer something unique in this crowded media marketplace.
Could they embrace some of the elements that make these alternative platforms so appealing? Could they become more conversational, more personality-driven, more engaging?
It's certainly possible, but it requires a shift in mindset, a willingness to experiment, to move beyond the traditional format, and find new ways to connect with viewers.
I can imagine them embracing the digital landscape, creating content that's tailored for specific platforms, maybe even experimenting with formats like podcasts or live streams.
That's a great point. It's not just about broadcasting to a mass audience anymore. It's about creating personalized experiences that cater to specific niches, specific communities.
So it's about understanding your audience deeply.
Exactly, and constantly adapting to their evolving needs and preferences.
Which brings us back to those figures like Musk and Rogan. They've tapped into something powerful.
They have. They understand the importance of authenticity, of connection, of creating a space where people feel heard.
And that's the challenge for traditional networks. How do they capture that same energy, that same level of engagement, while still maintaining their credibility, their journalistic integrity?
It's a delicate balance.
It is.
But I think it's possible. It requires a willingness to adapt, to experiment, to maybe even disrupt their own conventions.
So it's about finding a way to blend the best of both worlds.
Yeah.
The rigor of traditional journalism with the accessibility and engagement of these alternative platforms.
Exactly. And that's where the real innovation lies.
All right, we've covered a lot of ground here, from the rise of alternative platforms to the challenges facing traditional networks. But what does it all mean for us, the viewers?
Well, that's where things get even more interesting. Because it's not just about observing these changes, it's about understanding our role within this evolving ecosystem.
Okay, I'm ready to dive deeper. What's next?
Let's explore the impact this has on our own media consumption habits, our individual choices, and ultimately how those choices shape the world around us.
So we've talked about all these big changes happening in the media, the rise of alternative platforms, the challenges for traditional networks. But now I kind of want to bring it back to us, the viewers, because we're the ones navigating all of this. And it can feel pretty overwhelming at times.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, every time you open your phone, there's like a million new articles and videos, podcasts vying for your attention. It's this constant barrage of information.
It really is, and it's hard to know. Where do you even begin sometimes?
Yeah, you can easily feel like you're drowning in it all.
Exactly, and that's why I think it's so important to be aware of our own media habits. Like how are we actually consuming information?
Right, because we're not just passively absorbing it anymore. We're actively making choices about what we see and hear.
And those choices have consequences.
They do, because they shape our understanding of the world.
So it's not enough to just be aware of the changes happening around us. We also have to be aware of our own role in all of this.
Exactly. We have to be more intentional, more discerning.
So how do we do that? Like, what are some practical steps we can take to become more thoughtful consumers of information?
Well, I think it starts with recognizing that we have agency. We have the power to choose what we consume and how we consume it.
So it's not about letting those algorithms dictate everything.
No, it's about taking control, breaking out of those echo chambers, seeking out diverse perspective.
And that takes effort.
It does, but it's so important. Because if we only surround ourselves with information that confirms our existing beliefs, we're not really engaging in critical thinking.
We're just reinforcing our own biases.
Exactly. And that can lead to increased polarization, a lack of empathy, and ultimately a weaker society.
So how do we break free from those echo chambers?
Well, one thing you can do is start paying attention to the sources you're relying on. Are you getting your news from a variety of outlets? Are you actively seeking out perspectives that challenge your own?
I thought those algorithms.
Yeah, those can be tricky, but you can actually use them to your advantage.
How so?
By being curious. Click on articles that don't necessarily align with your interests. Explore different sides of an issue. Challenge the algorithm to show you something new.
So it's like we have to become our own curators.
Exactly. We have to be more proactive in shaping our own information diets.
And that's not easy.
It's not. But it's crucial if we want to be informed citizens, if we want to participate in a healthy democracy.
So this is about more than just media.
It is. It's about how we engage with the world around us, how we make decisions, how we relate to each other.
This whole conversation has really been eye-opening for me. I mean, we started with this news about MSNBC and ended up talking about the fate of democracy.
It's all connected.
It really is. So as we wrap up, what's the key takeaway for our listeners?
I think it's this. Be critical, be curious, and be engaged. The future depends on it.
Well said. And on that note, we'll leave you with this thought. In this age of information overload and algorithmic influence, how will you choose to shape your own media landscape? The choice is yours.